Over the Target, a new Washington Examiner show about investigations, whether that be our own exclusive stories or analyzing the multiple scandals, sagas, and salacious stories brewing in Washington, D.C. and beyond. I'm Chris Irvin, the managing editor, and I'm joined by investigations editor Sarah Bedford and Justice Department reporter Kaylin Dees. And if you've been following along on YouTube, we've done a few videos over the past month or so, which is exclusively focused on the Biden auto pen investigation. But we kind of felt now was as good a time as any to expand our interests. And really, this week has been dominated by two separate ongoing stories that are years in the making, both over a decade. One of them being the Jeffrey Epstein saga, and then now Russiagate has exploded back into our psyches. So we wanted to dive deeper into these, give the auto pen investigation a bit of a break, and really kind of knuckle down with these two. And I think I'll start with Sarah. So DNI Tulsi Gabbard this week uh, released declassified intelligence, which goes back and focuses on the ongoing Russiagate scandal. Perhaps you could maybe give us a little reminder of what that was, what's new here, and why it should be a bigger deal than some are making it out to be, and why this includes former President Barack Obama himself.
Yes, I'm of the view that there's just enormous, enormous significance to what DNI Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe have been releasing over the past few weeks. It's long in the past, but the first term of Trump's presidency was completely marred by the years-long criminal investigation into whether his campaign colluded with Russia. We now know that was a completely made up allegation from the Clinton campaign, but it was premised on this idea that Putin really did try to help Trump win in the election. And the only question that investigators had was, did Trump solicit that help? Did he secretly help facilitate it and work with the Russians? But this idea that Russia's intent was to help Trump win was sort of treated like settled science. And what Gabbard has uncovered is that actually, even that was never true. There was never any intelligence suggesting that Putin's intent was to help Trump win the election. If you go back to the summer of 2016, July 22nd, 2016, Caitlin and I are working on a timeline, so our readers will have all this broken down. On July 22nd, 2016, WikiLeaks releases the first of the emails that the Russians hacked from the DNC, and that causes a huge uproar for the Clinton campaign. So intelligence agencies started looking into the nature of Russia's interference in the election because this went further than Russia had ever really gone before in an election. Trump wins, and it turns out, as we get a few months into this intelligence community investigation of Russia's activities, CIA analysts come back and say, actually, boss, it looks like Russia wasn't actually trying to help Trump win. The more we look into it, the more our initial assumptions about what Russia was doing are wrong. But what Gabbard is alleging is that then, at the direction of Obama and under the stewardship of then CIA Director John Brennan, the intelligence agencies altered that intelligence to reach the opposite conclusion, that actually Russia was in fact trying to help Trump win. And I've been talking for a long time now, but that is so important because everything that followed, the entire house of cards of the Fallujah investigation, is built on this idea that Russia was trying to help Trump win. If that was not Russia's intent, then there was nothing to collude on. Like I've used the example that you can't investigate a suspect for being the accomplice to a bank robbery if it turns out that that bank never actually got robbed. So the entire investigation was built on this idea that Russia was trying to help Trump. And what Gabbard has revealed is that that was the lie, the original sin, to borrow a term, on which everything else was based. So it's hugely significant.
I think, thank you for that summary. And for those who aren't caught up in it, I think you did as coherent a job as possible for something that's
Mhm.
quite confusing. Kaylin, to the outsider looking in, certainly Tulsi Gabbard's White House press conference this week really, she was really saying that kind of Obama's fingerprints are all over this drive to seek intelligence that Trump was being favored by Putin. Uh, Whether it be Obama direct or members of his intelligence circle, John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, what can be done about this?
Yeah, that's the million dollar question, I think, because there's a lot of focus that's been on Brennan and Comey this entire time. We know that that's where the FBI first started looking into all of this a couple weeks ago. But now that there's so much impetus on Obama as sort of the orchestrator of the Russia collusion mess, that is starting to begin to develop questions as to how this is going to work out if there were to ever be some sort of criminal charges, which you talk to many former prosecutors, they're a little bit bearish on this because they just think it's unlikely given institutional protections surrounding former presidents. Now, you speak to them about how it could possibly go down. The answer that you get almost consistently across the board would be conspiracy against rights. And that is sort of the tester, I would say, that's going out there to get, where is this going to go? I think that undoubtedly it has to be something like a conspiracy case because there are many potential protections that we could see over individual acts just due to the 5 year statute of limitations. Now, if House Republicans, especially those on the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees, continue peeling back the layers of how the 2016 intelligence community assessment was produced, which we know was highly flawed. Now, they can expose potentially more political manipulation that's embedded in this process too. Part of this, if it is more difficult to proceed with charges, which remains to be seen if they're even going to bring them, part of this too could be sort of a lessons learned for the entire nation to be able to showcase exactly where the Obama administration tried to concoct this narrative based off of flimsy intelligence that they had months to verify, and in some cases were able to fully look into, find that it was discredited, but still feel a need to keep pushing it forward. That is what the American people, I think, some of them haven't been able to fully realize yet because this is such a long and tedious timeline and web of instances. But what D&I put out this week, I think, can give people some sort of shock and awe as to what the Obama administration was trying to do.
Sarah, there's a lot of fatigue about Russiagate. It's something that's dominated news cycles since 2016. We're getting onto a decade here. The media has downplayed it. Sorry, a lot of the media has downplayed it. A lot has been banging the drum saying it's super important. But I think there seems to be perhaps a little bit of a reluctance, maybe in Congress, to kind of go further with this. It's early days yet, obviously, but we've seen multiple special counsels involved with this. The Robert Mueller, obviously, then John Durham. Where do you see this going? Is there a prospect of another special counsel here? Charges, oversight? I mean, what? It might be too early to even say, but what would your inkling be?
So I think the circumstances under which Mueller and Durham were appointed are pretty different here. We needed a special counsel, according to Democrats and even some Republicans at the time, to investigate Russian collusion because the Trump administration couldn't be trusted to investigate itself. So special counsel was supposed to allay some fears about a conflict of interest there. Durham was appointed to investigate the origins of what happened at the FBI and DOJ because the Justice Department itself and the FBI wasn't trusted to investigate itself, right? You couldn't task the same people who we now know cut corners, in some cases criminally so, to investigate the origins of a probe that they opened, right? But now the revelations that are coming out are different from what Durham uncovered in that this was way outside the scope of what Durham was asked to do. Durham was asked to look at investigative decisions that domestic law enforcement officers made at the FBI and the Justice Department to open and advance this investigation. What Gabbard and Ratcliffe are revealing is are things that precipitated that cleared the way for the FBI to do that within the intelligence community, which is outside the DOJ's purview. It was outside of the Inspector General, the DOJ Inspector General investigation. It was outside the scope of Durham. It's not something that anybody has looked at before. All the focus has been on the collusion part of the investigation, not on the underlying intelligence on which the collusion investigation was built. So there could be an argument against using a special counsel in this instance because this is not the Justice Department looking into itself. This is the Justice Department looking into a totally separate agency and actions that occurred under a totally different administration because we're talking about things that happened under Obama. So those same conflict of interest concerns aren't necessarily there. However, a special counsel could insulate Trump a little bit more from these accusations that are undoubtedly going to come, especially if this moves forward to charges that he's the one weaponizing law enforcement agencies. So, from a political optics standpoint, that might be something that the Trump administration considers.
Kaylin, there's a joker in the pack here, and and Tulsi Gabbard is obviously focused on Obama and has tried to as much as possible. But has the Supreme Court, which you reported on in a past life, has it inadvertently given Obama a get out of jail free card, almost quite literally here?
So let's look at and see what the Supreme Court did in its decision, the context surrounding it. That was a case involving President Donald Trump, then former president at the time, facing the allegations from the Biden administration's Justice Department that there was a conspiracy to defraud the United States connected to this sort of surrounding allegation about the January 6th riot and efforts to essentially deny the results of the 2020 election. Now, we know that that was not a very strong case whatsoever. And it was basically fueled in part by DC judges that were not giving many favors to the former president as far as being able to, outright dismiss the case. And so it wound up going to the Supreme Court because it needed the justices to clarify what were the parameters of the president's powers. And so what that case did, I think, from a lot of people's perspectives, is gave some semblance of a shield to somebody like President Obama to be able to say, hey, I was in office at this time. You can't, throw charges at me. But I think that some conservative legal commentators, from what I've seen, are taking a more critical look at this and saying, well, it's not so much to say that every single thing a president does while they're in office can be considered immunity, especially whenever it pertains to an election that the president might be tampering with and potentially trying to, defraud, millions of voters of their right to see the person that they choose elected into office. If they're trying to literally suggest that this is that Russia was materially aiding the Trump campaign when it wasn't. So that has to be something that I think is meted out by a court still. And I think that it's definitely not something that should preclude the Justice Department from bringing a charge and to try to maybe get the justices to re-examine the scope of a presidential immunity. Not so long after this decision, we were told at the time that that's going to be a ruling for the ages by the justices. That was a quote from Neil Gorsuch. But at the same time, is it really always a ruling for the ages whenever this is something that we've never tapped into either? What happens whenever a former administration tries to basically lie to the American people and say that this was definitively Russia colluding with the Trump campaign? That is something that I think this DOJ will not be, they won't hesitate. That won't be. I don't think that'll be part of their decision of whether to bring charges in this case. That just because there's this immunity decision that's looming in the backdrop.
Yeah, and I suppose even if Obama is out of reach, and this is all with the proviso that this is proven, then there's others certainly to target or to question at the very least, and that would include, as we've mentioned, Brennan and Clapper and probably Jim Comey, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others. Anyway, I think this is a kind of long ongoing thing that I'm sure we won't get a conclusion anytime soon, but we'll continue to obviously monitor it and report on it as best we can. But perhaps we can shift tracks a little bit with the other dominant story that it's I think we're in week 3 or 4 now of this of the Jeffrey Epstein saga and even beyond that Epstein is the man that will not go away despite being dead for several years now. Um, Linked to the Obama Gabbard stuff, Sarah, do you think this release from Gabbard is a distraction, or is it a kind of cosmic coincidence that these are just happen to be two trains that have come down the track at the same time, and we're just in a kind of information overload here?
Well, this was an effort that the Trump administration had planned all along, right? Gabbard, Ratcliffe, I mean, they talked about this before they were even confirmed, that part of what they saw as their mandate was to bring transparency and accountability back to an intelligence community that they believed, and apparently with some substantial basis, had been weaponized against Trump and political opponents for years by Democrats. And so that was always going to be something that they were going to do. Is the timing of the release potentially connected to the Epstein situation? That's entirely possible. They could have sat on this stuff for another few weeks to let the Epstein thing blow over. It's pretty clear that Donald Trump is really unhappy about the fact that we're all still sitting here talking about Epstein. So perhaps the timing explains uh, why now Gabbard is coming forward with this. But I just think in these conversations, it's important not to ignore the substance of what's coming out because it's so hugely significant. And for those of us who have been following this story for now close to a decade, it's really revelatory and a huge moment to see things that were sort of long suspected but never proven. And the Epstein situation, though, for Trump, I mean, just to pivot to the way they've handled that, is nothing short of a PR disaster. Whoever is calling the shots on the way that they've handled this has made a series of strategic mistakes. I don't think the Trump administration could have scripted a better way to continue the conspiracy theories into infinity by the way that they have handled this in what looks like nothing short of a cover up. And what makes it so frustrating for the Trump people is that it didn't have to be this way. Nobody was asking the question about Epstein stuff. They're the ones who injected it into the conversation for years. I'm talking about Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi for years before they came into the office. They're the ones who made it a thing. No one forced them to do that. And then they came into power and completely botched it. It's a completely self-inflicted problem for them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. I have wondered if part of the reason Trump is so angry about the Epstein situation is that he knew that this Obama Russiagate stuff was coming and he doesn't want it to be overshadowed. And it's still yeah, self-inflicted wound or the dog that caught the car, I think is a good analogy. It doesn't know what to do with it. And Kaylin, I mean, what are your thoughts here? Why won't Jeffrey Epstein go away? Why won't the saga die? And why is the MAGA base so fractured over it? This is the first time I can recall where MAGA is split over something for a prolonged period of time. They've had arguments in the past, but usually Trump has come in and told them to knock it off and get on with it, and it still won't go away.
Yeah, I think to answer that question, you could go on for hours about what the symptoms are and the causes. Part of it is that there is a genuine feeling among MAGA voters that there is wrong, evil trafficking that happens in the world, especially many of which instances have happened at our southern border, and that this is a problem that needs to be resolved, and that even if the Epstein trafficking is over now because he's dead, there still needs to be justice for those victims. And the DOJ is saying that there are 1,000 victims, according to that July 6 memo. So there are so many unanswered questions. And the fact that their attempts to be more transparent only developed into more questions is exactly what got them into this spot. And I think Sarah put it perfectly that this is entirely self-inflicted because it is the Trump people in his orbit that were very adamant about getting this information out there. It's like they were the ones saying we're going to get it out. So where does that put us at now? And it puts us in this very strange situation actually, where now the Justice Department, the president's former criminal defense attorney Todd Blanche is meeting with Ghislaine Maxwell today, Thursday, July 24th, in Tallahassee, Florida, at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we have no idea what's going on in that meeting with her and her attorney. But all we know is that she is currently still in her appeals process right now to try to overturn her conviction. She thinks that there was some plea agreement that the Epstein plea agreement that he got in the early 2000s somehow applied to her as well, even though this DOJ is rejecting that argument. And now we're seeing this conversation happen behind the scenes between her counsel and Trump's former defense attorney, who's now the deputy attorney general. What are they going to be discussing? How is this going to apply to the Congress efforts to get Ghislaine Maxwell to testify? Because now the DOJ has gotten to her first. She's talking to them. So is there going to be something that she's able to tell the DOJ or agree to speak openly about that's going to perhaps try to dismiss anyone's fears, worst fears, that Trump was allegedly implicated in some of Epstein's worst, deeds? Or is there going to be more that Ghislaine is going to get to say to Congress? Is that going to be part of this deal with Blanche? Is going to be like, you're going to testify to Congress, and but the underlying issue, I think, that many people are about to, if they haven't already woken up to this, is that whenever it comes to a defendant speaking to the government like this, and with her attorneys present, and she's been wanting to get out of this conviction that she's facing in 20 years, people are asking themselves, what's in it for her to talk?
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the grave elements that we're going to have to come up against in the coming days. What does it mean for her to talk to the government right now? Is she going to get something out of this? Is she going to get time served? I think those are, perhaps, questions that are a little bit, raised soon, but I think that they should be asked now before we get to a point where, there's already, agreements that are happening that we don't even know about. I think that those are the important questions that people should be looking at.
Right. And that would also, if they come out with an agreement or some sort of deal, that's not going to help the base either, because they're going to
Mm-hmm.
claim corruption, and they're going to claim that it's the elites getting off again, and it's never going to satiate the appetite, I suppose. Sarah, I'm wondering there. I feel a lot of the Epstein reporting has been a little bit of a distraction. This week in particular, there was images that came out of Epstein at Trump's wedding to Marla Maples, which was back in the 1990s. There's other footage there, and it follows on from a Wall Street Journal article about a body drawing that Trump has said to have done. Now, Trump has pushed back on that strongly, and he's launched a lawsuit against the journal. Um, does any of that actually kind of add to the story here? I mean, Trump's been fairly consistent, as far as I'm concerned, on his relationship with Epstein, and we know that he cut it off with him at some point. But does any of this actually help, or does it just kind of is it just more kind of appetizers and people kind of drinking from the fire hose, I suppose, to mix my metaphors?
None of this contradicts the public record of what we do know about Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which started sometime in the 1980s because they were both big, I don't know the word for it, to-dos, big guys down in Palm Beach, which is
Socialize.
socialites, there we go, which is
Yeah.
a pretty insular social circle when you're at that level of the socioeconomic pyramid. I personally have no idea what that's like, but in this small moneyed town of Palm Beach, everybody kind of knew each other, is how the narrative goes. They lived down the street from each other. And they both really enjoyed women and partying, and so they were spotted together on a number of occasions. It has never been alleged that Donald Trump participated in any of the sex trafficking activities that Jeffrey Epstein was charged with engaging in, that we now know forms the basis of this whole conspiracy theory. It was said that their relationship started to fall apart in the early 2000s, that in 2004 they got in a bidding war over this fancy piece of property on Palm Beach, right on the water, came up for sale. They both wanted it, and the bidding war got pretty bitter. Donald Trump did end up winning, bought this piece of this house. But then 3 years later, supposedly the two of them had a falling out in 2007 when Epstein supposedly hit on the daughter of a prominent member of the Mar-a-Lago club. And when Trump caught wind of this, he says he kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago, which was, and I guess kind of still is, the place to be in Palm Beach for these rich guys. All of this, though, was before the first time that Jeffrey Epstein was ever indicted by law enforcement. In 2007, we know that Jeffrey Epstein was under investigation by federal prosecutors in Florida, but that wasn't necessarily public knowledge yet. In 2008, so a year after the Trump falling out, that's where we get that much criticized non-prosecution agreement that Jeffrey Epstein entered into under then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who that came back to bite him in the butt when he was the labor secretary under Trump, and he had to resign over all of this. So, Epstein has been haunting Trump for quite some time. This was back when Epstein was still alive, mind you, that this was
Yeah.
sort of revived because the feds finally, once and for all, thought they really had them. But all of that to say that everything that's come out about the letter and the photographs, none of that contradicts the timeline that says Donald Trump had cut off his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein by the time Epstein ever got in trouble for the first time with the law. It's never been alleged a single time that Trump engaged in the sex trafficking activities. And one would suspect, given how much the DOJ has thrown at him over the years, that if
Yeah.
there ever had been a shred of evidence, we would have known about it by now.
Yeah. I don't imagine Merrick Garland sitting on that bombshell for 4 years. I know we're running out of time, so I'm just one or two other questions. House Democrats are obviously enjoying this and they're teeing off on it. Why are there several House Republicans that won't let this go? And I'm thinking of Thomas Massey, but there are others who seem to have a vested interest in keeping this going.
Yeah, I have an idea about that because you mentioned Massey and there's another Representative Burchett, Tim Burchett, and there's also Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. And if you take a look at some of their constituencies and where they really sort of made their claims to fame, it's on being on top of these issues that really matter to people in this country that make up Trump's very diverse base. The people who have, personal experience with abuse in their lives, maybe haven't grown up, in the nicest of environments, and look at the Epstein situation, look at all the victims, and just frankly see it as an injustice that needs more information out there. I mean, they've been, sort of pushed by the people who voted for them to be on top of this issue. So I think that that's a problem for President Trump because whenever you see these people, they are sort of, I think, having to walk a very tight rope. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been like his number one cheerleader, but also at the same time, she has to be so adamant about this Epstein issue. And I think that part of it does fold back to the people that she represents. So definitely like, an interesting sort of play that you're seeing from people like them because I think that they're the types in the Republican body that are going to keep this issue alive, while Democrats, alternatively, I think they're just using it to try to become the next Russiagate 2.0.
Sure. Um, and it always goes back. I don't wish to kind of dismiss conspiracy theories necessarily, especially in this case, because there's some, as you rightly point out, some really kind of horrible things that have happened over the years involving Jeffrey Epstein. But my question is, if Trump does everything that people want him to do, are people's conspiracy meters are they right? Are they right to be so charged up here? And can something like this ever end? Or is it never, can you ever satiate the appetite of conspiracy theorists? I think Kaylin, it might have been yourself that posted on X, the person who the conspiracy theorist of JFK goes to the park, dies and goes to the pearly gates, and God says, ask me one question, and he says, who shot JFK? He says it was Lee Harvey Oswald on my own, on his own. There was nobody else, and the conspiracy theorist pauses and goes, yeah, this goes deeper than I thought.
Deeper than I thought, yeah.
Yeah, so that's my point though. Like if it can those who have been chasing the ghost of Epstein for years be satisfied with any information that comes out?
Well, I answered the last one. Maybe Sarah, you answer this, and maybe I'll have something to say.
I think that there are things that authorities could do to allay some of those concerns, transparency concerns, and releasing some things that people thought should come out, right? And, one example is during the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, that prosecution has been really heavily criticized, but there were pages and pages of her address book that never got entered into evidence that prosecutors didn't try to use. And if you think back to the context in which she was charged, this was not too long after Epstein had died in custody. There was a sense of outrage that these guys were going to get away with it. And so prosecutors made a decision that they were not going to cast a wide net with her. They were going to try to get her on the charges where they knew they had her. Just her explicit participation in the abuse of a very small number of victims. I believe it was like 3 or 4 girls that they had. They did not try to prosecute the broader sex trafficking ring. And because of that, prosecutors had all this evidence they had put together in preparation for the Epstein prosecution and then for the Maxwell prosecution, but they chose to use just a tiny sliver of it to make sure that they really nailed her on the charges that they knew they could prove. There's a lot of evidence that never went to trial that the Trump administration could release that would shed some more light on the situation. But then you do have the risk that one, you have victims' identities in these papers. None of them want to go on the record. The most prominent victim, Virginia Giuffre, just died under mysterious circumstances in Australia, which has only poured gasoline on these conspiracies, but certainly those are things on the minds of victims who might be identified. But you also have a lot of names wrapped up in the association with Epstein that have nothing to do with the sex trafficking. One of them being Donald Trump. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein spent a lot of time with celebrities, rich people, academics, executives. Many of them, if not most of them, didn't even know that he had this sex trafficking ring, right? But they visited his townhouse in New York. They flew on his plane. They went down to his island, and their names would be released, their reputations potentially permanently damaged when that information wouldn't provide any significant addition to the public's understanding of what happened. Those are the concerns that DOJ has. So releasing every file, maybe not the right move, but if you released stuff like the Maxwell trial evidence that was withheld, that could certainly be a step forward.
Okay, all right. Well, I can see the timer running down on our call, so perhaps now might be a good time to wrap it there. But I'm sure we'll be meeting again at some point in the near future to discuss the latest developments in this and the AutoPen investigation and anything else that comes along as well. It's a truly fascinating time to be covering the news right now. I'm glad I'm doing it with you guys, and yeah, we'll see you soon.